So a few months ago, I created this YouTube channel, and I had a lot of inspiration and ideas, and what I really wanted it to be was a channel about being a trail runner in the Northeast who just loves being in the woods, taking my Land Rover out, exploring lots of new places, the trails, the dirt roads, everything in between, and just doing it for the reason why I got into trail running in the first place, which is the love of the trails, the love of movement and being outside, and just honestly feeling free and seeing the world, much less about the splits and the race times and chasing UTMB stones and all that other stuff, which is still fun and meaningful, but not what I love most about the sport. So I thought this was going to be a really cool channel where I'd be highlighting really technical trails and jumping off rocks, things like that. Instead, I can't run. It's maybe not what you think. I don't have a running injury. And if you know me and you know my story at all, then you know that the reason I can't run is because I've been dealing with a handful of tick-borne illnesses for the past year plus, which have significantly impacted my running, my racing, and my life. And right now it's the worst that it's ever been. For the past year, I've still been able to run, even though things haven't been great with running. But kind of out of the blue, my body just totally shut down. So things are really different for me right now. I have a bunch of weird symptoms, and yeah, I can't really do what I love. And I have just gone back and forth on whether or not I should be sharing what's going on, because it's really sad for me anyways. I have a lot of grief and sadness and frustration because everything seems to be going wrong, even with my treatment. But I think the reason that I even know what's going on with me and am getting treatment the way that I am is because someone else I know shared their own story with tick-borne illnesses. So for the time being, I guess this YouTube channel is going to be a little bit more about what it's like with these tick-borne illnesses. You'll see me do some walking because that's the only thing I can do, and try to educate people on what these illnesses are like, the symptoms to look out for, what to do if you get bit by a tick, things like that. And then, hopefully this is also a comeback story. I still have really big hopes and dreams, and yeah, it's super, super frustrating. Even just last year, and then 3 years ago, I was on Team USA for trail running and sky running, and now I can't even jog 3 miles at 10-minute pace, which is a pretty sharp cliff for me. I can still move, which I'm grateful for, but honestly, walking kind of sucks, especially when you want to be running. And I live in the woods, and it's really unfortunate to not really feel like I can enjoy the place where I live. I'm kind of braving it out here today, walking on the trail. It's an old Jeep road, but there's grass. Honestly, I'm terrified of grass, and I'm terrified of being on the trails. So where things stand right now, last year in June, it was basically exactly a year ago. 1 year ago today was my last truly normal day. I ran the Ultra Sky Madeira race, which was a 27-mile race on the island of Madeira, and it was absolutely epic and awesome. It was my second race of the Sky Running World Series, and I had a great race. It was my best finish in the series. I really only had 2 good finishes, which were my first 2 races before I got sick, but it was a really awesome trip. Josh came with me, and the island was wild. It was super steep and super technical and everything that I absolutely love about trail running. But By the time I got back home, about 48 hours later, I had COVID. And then my system went absolutely nuts and I pretty much never recovered. So I had some weird symptoms before, and I'll do some videos on what that all looked like, but it was really not until June, I think, getting COVID just really messed with my immune system, and anything that it had been suppressing came to the surface. I spent a bunch of time flipping between doctors trying to figure out what was going on until I went to the Stram Center, which deals with tick-borne illnesses. And the only reason I went there is because I'd been there in the past for a tick-borne illness, and I wasn't actually thinking that I had anything related to ticks, but I figured they might be able to help me. And unfortunately, as it turns out, over the course of a year, with lots of different testing and repeating the same tests over and over and over again, it turns out that I've been dealing with Lyme, anaplasmosis, babesia, and Bartonella, and that I had all of them at the same time. They're really good at hiding in your system, so initially I tested positive for Lyme and anaplasmosis, and then babesia showed up a little bit later, and then Bartonella actually showed up as having been present but then negative. And most recently I pretty much found out after feeling really terrible again a couple months ago that my Lyme is active again, so probably never went away, and my Bartonella is active too. So the combination of those two things explain a lot of what I've been feeling, which is, if I'm not doing anything, I don't feel terrible. I was having lots of really low grade headaches and just some concentration problems and lots of memory issues, brain fog. But the real thing was I just couldn't run. And it was getting worse with long runs, and I would have periods where I was okay and training was actually going well, but then I'd go through a period where I felt really terrible. And I just knew, on paper, the training I was doing was so much more than what my body was absorbing or producing. And, being an athlete for basically my entire life and a runner for 10 plus years, you just know your body, and you know when something's off. And I knew it wasn't overtraining, even though I've been totally gaslit into that over the past year. So I went back to Stram, and yeah, it was pretty clear once I said everything out loud that this was still an issue. So right now, the worst things I'm dealing with are I'm really dizzy, as soon as I start moving. So it requires a lot of concentration and effort to just kind of keep in a straight line. And my head just feels terrible. So super dizzy, and I get fatigued pretty easily. And yeah, I can't run. Trying to run is this extreme body heaviness. It's kind of like hitting the wall in a marathon, except it can happen 5 minutes into jogging, warm-up jogging. And, I was pretty much training full-time up until 2 weeks ago. So it's not like I just lost a ton of fitness and I'm really out of shape, although I certainly feel that way. So yeah, it's clear that my body is really struggling. And of course, I just had COVID again. The past couple of weeks have been a total disaster. We tried IV treatment at the Stram Center. So IV antibiotics, initially just for the Lyme and babesia, but the doxy via IV and the azithromycin, which is another antibiotic, I don't know, it was one of them or two of them, destroyed my veins. So my arm started hurting really bad, and it turns out that it gave me blood clots in both of my arms. And unfortunately, clotting is an issue with Lyme. It makes you more coagulable. So I had to stop treatment, which is really unfortunate. I did switch to an oral doxy, but that's not helping with the Bartonella at the moment anyways, which we didn't even know was part of the issue when I started the IV antibiotics. So yeah, it it wasn't great. So I had to wait for my arms to heal. But in the meantime, I was having other weird symptoms, like my chest was burning, and, you know, this dizziness thing. They wanted to make sure I didn't have a clot in my lungs. So I got, and you need to go get a CAT scan immediately message. And I did that. And the only place I could do that was in the emergency room. So I spent 10 hours at Albany Med in the ER, pretty much just sitting there, waiting and waiting and waiting. And I got some CAT scans done on my head, my chest, and then I had an MRI done as well. And everything was normal, which is something you get very used to hearing with tick-borne illnesses. Everything looks normal. Yeah, like my blood work is basically identical to 2022, 2023, when I was in the absolute best shape of my life and felt great. So the good news is that I didn't have any serious clotting issues. The bad news is that probably from sitting in the ER for 10 hours, I got COVID. And so then I had COVID on top of these tick-borne symptoms, and I've just been waiting. And I know this is kind of it's a lot. It probably doesn't make sense. It's all out of order. And that's how it feels the whole past year. It doesn't feel in order. It doesn't make sense. Today, I'll be starting IV antibiotics again. And I'm really nervous just because everything was such a disaster a couple weeks ago. But I'm also really hopeful. It was really heartbreaking to find out that this was still an issue. And then I started treatment like literally the day that I had my doctor's appointment. And then I had to stop. And so I feel like I've just been waiting and not feeling well. And I just really want to get back to my life. I want to get back to running, of course, but I'd also just like to feel normal. Yeah, so fingers crossed. Hopefully by sharing my story, there'll be useful information for people out there so you don't end up like me. It's not a fun place to be. And if you do end up here, there are people and places that can help you. So I've learned, that I'm not alone. There are a lot of people who are dealing with things that are very similar to what I'm dealing with. And they've been really helpful in making sure that I feel like I'm not alone and that there's hope. So yeah, I hope to have some better updates next time. Until then, be well and check yourself for ticks.